So my name is Sarah McDugal, and I am an author and speaker and abuse recovery coach, specifically for women who have been wounded by abusive relationships in the faith community. So that is my specific line of work. I do intensive trainings for churches and church leadership teams. I also do abuse recovery coaching. I have a limited number of sessions for those, and I do online courses and resources online and so on. So what I want to talk to you about today, what I've been asked to speak about, is coming out of the fog and understanding and recognizing the signs of abuse, the red flags of abuse. I personally believe that this is incredibly important for women in ministry to know, for a couple of reasons. One, because while abuse and domestic violence can go in both directions, it can happen to either gender. It is very heavily gendered. More than 70% of domestic violence and abuse victims are female. And so it is highly likely that as women who minister in faith communities, as one of the previous speakers just said, we will be the first line of defense. And it is important for us to be able to know the signs and the red flags, to be able to tune in to things that are going on. The second reason that I think this is incredibly important is that, unfortunately, very often women in ministry also find ourselves working in abusive infrastructures ourselves. And it's important for us to be able to recognize the signs of an abusive infrastructure, of an abusive system. So I want to start by talking about the different forms of domestic violence, but I'm going to end up discussing the tools and elements of abusive systems, because I want you to be able to walk away from our time together, not only knowing the 13 different forms of domestic violence, but also being able and equipped to see the tools that any abuser uses, regardless of the environment or the context. So that can be in a workplace, in a congregation, in a family structure, in a marriage, in a social group of friends. I want you to be able to have these tools to recognize these. So if it's possible, and correct me if I'm wrong, whoever the co-host is, I would like to be able to play a 4.5-minute video that condenses everything faster than I could speak it, because I have trouble staying exactly on point, and the video will get everything across very quickly. Can we do that? Will I be able will you be able to hear it? If I share my screen.
Just make sure you check at the bottom, optimize video.
Optimize for video clip and share sound. All right, so here we go. Wait, what? Install the Zoom audio device and restart your audio. Okay, hold on.
Just follow the.
Let's see if this works. Okay, I'm gonna try this. I'm gonna try sharing it again. Hold on. Well, guys, if it doesn't work, I'll just move forward. Here we go. I think it worked. Can you hear it?
No. Did you check the box at the bottom?
I did. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to talk through this. So the question is, can you see it though? Can everyone see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Probably email it quickly.
Domestic violence is the second leading cause of death among African American women. Domestic violence is the third leading cause of death among Native and Indigenous women. It's the seventh leading cause of death among Caucasian women. Research tells us that 1 in 3 women are sexually abused. 1 in 6 men are sexually abused. 82% of victims under 18 are female. 88% of child sexual abusers are male. Only 6 out of every 1,000 rapists spend even one day in jail. 93% of child sexual abusers are known and trusted by the child. 34% of child sexual abuse starts under age 12, as young as 4. And sexual abusers have 50 to 150 victims before first arrest. Domestic violence is so much more than just bruises. I know I'm not the first speaker today to mention this. Non-physical domestic violence is more damaging than we realize, and more than 70% of domestic violence victims are female. There are 13 types of abuse. Child abuse, cultural abuse, there is emotional abuse, there is financial abuse, there is intellectual abuse, and all of these forms are considered domestic violence by domestic violence experts. Pets and property abuse, physical abuse, that's the obvious one, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, social abuse, spiritual abuse, and verbal abuse. But all of these center around one core mindset, which is a 13th type of abuse, and it's the root of all the others. It's the abuse of power, a sense of entitlement, and it happens in churches too. In fact, statistics seem to indicate that it may happen more in churches than it does elsewhere. Clergy often mistakenly say things like, you just need to forgive. If you gave him more sex, he wouldn't look at porn, he wouldn't cheat. Why are you digging up the past? Things like, you're so bitter, you need to just stop talking about this. You need to leave it alone. Go home and pray more instead of talking to others about your problems. You should be proud to suffer like Jesus did. I've never seen him be mean to anyone else. Maybe you're making it up. Maybe it's in your head. If you leave him, you'll ruin your children's lives. It will anger God. So when churches and clergy refuse to listen to survivors and offer tangible support, when we remain uneducated about the patterns of abusive behaviors, when we avoid getting involved in messy situations, when we excuse sinful behaviors based on someone else's good public image, when we give advice that fails to prioritize safety for the victims, when we fail to report all allegations to authorities for investigation, when we prioritize public reputation of the organization over truth, and when we hold victims accountable instead of the abusers who are causing harm, the church becomes complicit in what is called double abuse. Double abuse misrepresents the heart of God and is a form of spiritual abuse. James 1:27 says, pure and genuine religion in the sight of God is what? Helping to care for the widows and the orphans. Every church leader needs to know the signs of abuse. You need to know the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You need to know these resources. So part of what I do is help to educate women and men and church leaders on these topics. Now, one of the things that I have available, and I'm going to give you a link in the chat. One of the things that I have available on my website is, here it is, wilderness2wild.com/giveaways. And this right here is the Systems of Abuse chart. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
All right. It's going to be very small on your screens. And that's why I've also made it available as a free download. I'm giving it away to anyone who would like to go and download it from my website. But this is a very handy systems of abuse chart that is a great reference tool for the 13 forms of abuse and samples or examples of each of them underneath for children, culture, emotional, financial, intellectual. Very often, we have a hard time when we have been immersed in an abusive environment. It becomes our normal, right? It becomes our everyday. As a result, it can be very hard to recognize that something is actually abusive because we have lived with it for so long. And very often, especially as Dr. Lover was talking about with spiritual abuse, and that when we have become conditioned to just accept spiritual manipulation and spiritual control, and we have had spiritual belief systems become very commonplace, then we often, especially as women, we internalize the acceptance of mistreatment, and we may even perpetuate it on ourselves and on the women around us without even realizing. So it's very, very helpful to have tools that break down illustrations so that we can say, oh wow, I didn't realize that was actually abuse. It's very interesting. One of the organizations that I work with is called Psalm 82 Initiative. If you haven't followed them on Facebook, definitely give them a follow. And one of the things that I remember stood out to me when their director said this, he said, an abuse victim will always lie to you. And I remember hearing that years ago, and I was like, whoa, wait a second. Stop that. What do you mean? We're supposed to believe victims, right? And he said, oh, no, that's not what I mean. Every time someone who is living in abuse comes to church and says, I'm fine. Every time someone who is being victimized comes to pastoral counseling and sits there with their spouse across from you and smiles and takes the blame for it, they're lying to you because they have to convince themselves that this is okay, that this is normal in order to survive. So if you are working with victims of abuse, you will be lied to until they feel safe enough to tell you the truth, which is a different way than we typically look at it, right? We usually look at it the other way around. We think, oh, well, they're making these things up. But no, that's when someone is finally finding the courage to tell you the truth of what is going on. Now, I want to give you some tools. And these are, so this one right here, this one you can download, like I said, from my website. And on my website, I also have a tremendous amount of resources. I have assessments for safety. I have links to danger and lethality assessment, links to the Mosaic threat assessment in my advocate and survivor resource lists. I have a parenting through trauma resource list with the best books for parents and children who are going through divorce, surviving abuse, trying to rebuild. I have a betrayal trauma resource list for those who have, if you have women in your congregation who have just discovered that their husband has either been unfaithful or has been sexting or has a porn addiction, and they've just discovered this and they're going through betrayal trauma. I have the best books on the market listed there so that you can give them good, solid resources. So all of those are there on that link on wilderness2wild.com giveaways. Now, what I want to give you are the 4 tools of abuse. These 4 tools are present regardless of the context of the abusive situation. Now, can you guys see this? Somebody give me a thumbs up. When I show my screen, I can no longer see the chat, so I have no idea what anyone is saying.
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can see it. Awesome. Great. I don't like this whole everyone else being muted thing because I like the two-way conversation. So those of you who I can see your face, give me facial expressions because then I have something to work on. All right. So there are 4 tools of abuse that are present in any abusive context. And before we get into this, I know some of you are looking at it while I'm talking, but before we get into this, I want us to step back and think of the character of Christ versus the character of Lucifer, who became Satan. So on one end of the spectrum of selfishness, we have Satan, who is all take, right? On the other end of the spectrum, we have Jesus Christ, who is all give. He is all self-sacrifice. Satan is all trickery and deception. God will win us to his heart with love and truth or not at all, right?
Right.
God gives us the facts and the truth and says, choose you this day who you will serve. It is your choice. You get to make an informed decision. I am here. I love you. I want you to choose the right, but you may choose whatever you will. The consequences are yours to be chosen. Satan has every other trick in the book.
Yeah.
Betrayal, deception, distortion, manipulation, intimidation, deflection, extortion, enticement, bribery, trickery, anything other than pure love and truth. It all belongs in Satan's toolbox. So when our evangelism is based on fear, persuasion, pushy, forceful, trickery, manipulation, it is not using God's character. When our marriages are based on persuasion, coercion, frustration, manipulation, they are not reflecting God's character. And you guys have to forgive me, I have no control over the train tracks that are right beside where I am. So if you hear the train whistle, it just happens this time of day here. So as we are in psychology, psychiatric terms, we would talk about the narcissism spectrum, right? But I'm not a psychiatrist, and most of your congregational church members and most pastors aren't psychiatrists either. So if we look at that same spectrum from a gospel point of view, we are looking at it from the spectrum between the characters of Christ and Satan. And every human falls somewhere on that spectrum. Now, I'm not qualified to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder or the dark tetrad personalities or Machiavellian or antisocial, and you probably aren't either, most of you. Now, there may be a few of the doctors among us that are. So they're the exceptions to the rule, but most of us, if you're a pastor, then psychiatric diagnostics is really not your field of expertise. So we can't go around calling everyone narcissists or whatever else, but we can recognize traits of the fruit, because Jesus says, by their fruit you will know them. We can recognize traits of the fruit that are on this spectrum between the contrast of the description of Christ's character and Satan's character. And we can assess our pastoring, our evangelism, our nurturing, our parenting, and our marriages, and our counseling, pastoral counseling, I mean, in the framework of, am I giving facts in truth and love and then allowing someone to make free will decisions? Or am I using any other toolbox tool that belongs to Satan, because everything else is Satan's? Which am I doing? Where does my ministry fall in this spectrum? And the people I'm working with, where does their fruit fall in this spectrum? So in any of these contexts, there will be 4 tools of abuse present. The first, and in a romantic relationship, this, but also in spiritual relationships, in spiritually abusive contexts, this is the first one that usually shows up, and it's often long before there is commitment, marriage commitment or spiritual commitment, and that is isolation. The idea in a romantic relationship, baby, it's you and me against the world. You don't need to listen to your mama. You don't need to listen to your daddy. Your friends don't understand you. I'm the only one that gets you. Just ignore those people. Cut those people out of your life. Don't spend time with them. It's just you and me. All we need is each other. All of these are lies. They are unhealthy, toxic lies that tear us apart from the fabric of connection and relationships that keep us healthy and sane and strong and well embedded in a strong social and spiritual life. The same thing with a church life. If you're being isolated away in an unhealthy way, then there's this fostering of allegiance. The abuser's behavior is fostering allegiance to self while excluding or diminishing other important relationships. We see this everywhere from dating teenagers to the church board, right? The effect on the victim is that they feel alone and rejected and helpless. Now, the second tool is deflection. And I'm giving you, I realize I'm giving you a quick pass, bird's eye overview, but it's enough to begin thinking about these tools and starting to put situations into this rubric and say, my gut says there's something off. Which of the tools of abuse are being used here? My intuition is telling me something. What tools are present? Deflection is the next one. Imagine that for deflection, that the person who is the abuser has a shield in front of them, and that shield has this force field. Everything bad that is the consequences of their choices, their actions, their words, comes toward the shield and bounces off onto anyone and anything else. All the bad stuff slides off of me and onto you, because I have this force field, and this shield keeps me from taking responsibility for anything that I do, say, or have done in the past. It was because of the situation. It was because of the work environment. It was because of my childhood trauma. It was because of my mama. It was because of what you did. And in extreme cases, I would never have slammed the child into the wall if that kid hadn't been crying nonstop for 2 hours. I mean, that's an extreme illustration, but an abusive person is going to seek to shift blame or negative attention away from themselves and onto anyone or anything else that can take it. And this makes the victim feel guilty and indignant, but also often sympathetic, because all of a sudden you feel so bad for them instead of them taking responsibility. For example, if a woman's porn addicted husband has stopped showing any sexual interest in her and says, oh, and she's trying to get to the bottom of it. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know about his porn addiction yet. All she knows is that he has no sexual interest in her. And then finally he says, would you just stop pestering me for sex? You don't understand. I was raped, so I'm not interested in sex with you. Then all of a sudden she feels horrible, right? She's like, oh my goodness, I had no idea you were going through this. You were holding this inside. She doesn't know it's a lie because he's covering for his porn addiction. She's sympathetic for him, and she stops all requests for any personal accountability for his actions or behavior. He has a get out of jail free card because of what he says is the problem. He's deflecting blame to something else, and it's false blame. Now, if he actually had endured that trauma, then he should be getting himself into therapy so that he can deal with it, so that he can take responsibility for his actions, and so that he can be a healthy husband and heal. But if he's using that as a deflection to get her to stop asking questions about his secret sexual life and his deception, then that's abusive behavior. Number 3, manipulation. This is exactly the opposite of deflection. They've still got a shield, but instead of this shield being a force field, now it's magnetic. Instead of the bad stuff slides off of me and onto someone else, all the good stuff comes to me. The credit for a project with the group, it comes to me. The glory for my good-looking family, even though it's hell at home, but we looked perfect at church, it all boosters my image. Anything that is good from anything anyone else does, I get the credit for it. We have people like this in leadership. We have people like this as spouses. We have people like this in family groups, social groups, workplaces, any context, again. So this is what bolsters the public image, or it tricks and traps the victim into acting according to the abuser's interests because of the manipulation. And the victim begins to feel confused and cornered and crazy and like they don't have any options. The last one is intimidation. This is where the abuser employs threats or actions. So actions or the threat of action to promote sufficient fear to get compliance. Now, in a domestic violence situation, this could be something really blatant, like if you don't do what you're told, I will take the kids and you'll never see them again. Now that's a threat. Or if you leave me, life won't be worth living, even though I've done all this stuff to you. I'll commit suicide, it'll be your fault. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. And so she stays. Or it could be very covert, like you have 3 small toddlers at home, but if there are any toys on the floor when he gets home from work, he will stomp around silently because the house looks lived in, it's not clean and tidy, and he will be you'll get the silent treatment for days because it wasn't up to his standards when he got home, and he doesn't like to help or pick up. So when you know he texts, I'm getting ready to leave work, or I'll be home in half an hour, suddenly you get your tired mama butt up and you start scurrying around to clean everything up so that it doesn't look like children live here. Why? Not because he said he'll commit suicide, not because he said he'll hit you, not because he may even have hit you before, but because you're trying to avoid a consequence. You're scared enough of the silent treatment that you've got compliance. All of these things remove the autonomy and the personhood of the other person, of the victim, and they make the victim feel paralyzed and hopeless and anxious. Now, we can see these again in any context. This way of looking at the tools of abuse takes it out of him versus her. It takes it out of the gender argument and says these are tools of abuse in any environment, whether it is the church board or a marriage in your congregation. And so when we are looking at it from this lens, there is no way. Now, a lot of times we have resources for domestic violence, and if the abuser reads them, they can become a better abuser, right? You read the resources for how to understand the abuser, and the abuser gets more savvy in how they manipulate as a result. But with these 4 tools, you can't be a better abuser by looking at these 4 tools, because it exposes anything you want to do to control the other person, right?
That's good stuff.
So, yeah, so in this way, can you guys still see it?
Yes, yes.
The little green thing around it disappeared. So in this way, you have a tool, a rubric that allows you to be more discerning. Now, here's how much time do I have? Because I don't have a clock in front of me. So you guys, you tell me what my time frame is here.
I think we just started another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes. Okay. So as we are looking at this, I'm going to give you also a similar rubric, a second set of 4 that is called the 4 elements. But before we go there, I want to give you 2 tips for when I'm thinking in a coaching perspective, parishioners, when people in your faith community come to you for advice. If there is, and you probably already know this, but if there is a woman who hints at or begins to start disclosing, what she says to you at the beginning will never be the full scope. First of all, she doesn't understand the full scope. Second, she's never going to be brave enough to tell you exactly how bad it is right from the beginning. It will need drawing out. But it can often be very difficult to figure out who the actual abuser is in a situation. Let's say you have a couple who comes to you for counseling, pastoral input. Well, who is most likely to be willing to do the work? Who's the one generally dragging the couple there for counseling? Anyone? The husband or the wife? Who is it? The wife, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the wife. And so if you have a husband who is reluctantly pleasing his wife because she's been badgering him forever to, we got to get counseling. We got to do something about this. We need to get counseling. We need to get counseling. He's like, fine, I'll go with you. So he gets there and the two of them sit there in front of you and she is willing to do the work. So where does the pastoral counselor tend to put all of their effort? On her. Because she's the one who's willing to read the books. She's the one who comes with the homework done. She's the one who's engaging in the conversation. She's the one who's sharing what her frustrations are. Or maybe she's very quiet, but she's still the one who is eagerly doing the work. So we put all the work on her because she's the one willing to do the work, not because she may be the actual problem. Now, sometimes she may be. You have to use these tools of abuse to figure it out. But because she's generally the one doing the lion's share of the emotional lifting in the relationship. There are times when it's the husband who is like, oh, you will go to counseling with me. We are going to the pastor. We are going to sort this out. And the pastor is going to tell you what a terrible wife you are. So that does happen also. But here's tip number 2. If both people, both spouses, agree on who the problem is, it's the other one. For example, if you have a couple who comes in and they say, he says, she just is so emotional and there's this stuff that keeps happening at home, and do you see what I have to live with? And she says, yeah, I've gotten mad sometimes, and it's me, it's really me. She is agreeing with him because that is the safe thing for her to do. She cannot disagree with him in public without paying the price for it at home. If both people equally agree that only one of them is at fault, it's the other one, as a general rule of thumb. Now, there was a third one that I was going to share with you. It slipped my mind. When it comes back to me, I'll share it. In the meantime, let's look at the 4 elements. Here we go. We're going to stop this for just a second. We're going to look at the 4 elements infographic. And here we go. This is the last one. Do you guys see this one now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay, great. Thumbs up is good. I can't see chats and I can't hear voices. All right. So in any time that there are those 4 abusive tools taking place, there will also be 4 relational elements. These 4 elements are required for an abusive system to operate smoothly. Now, I say operate smoothly. I do not mean operate pleasantly. I'm not saying that it's enjoyable or safe for the people involved. I'm saying for it to operate functionally, for it to function smoothly. The first is entitlement. The core concept of abuse is that the abuser is entitled to power and control over the other people or persons in their life. And the benefit to them is that they have the privilege of being the teller, the boss, the leader, not in a position of servanthood, but in a position of control. And the victim's painful experience is one of injustice and unfairness. We have exacerbated this sense of entitlement in the faith community by teaching men that to be first is to be in control and to be in charge and the boss. When I read scripture, I see that God created men to go first. First to love, first to sacrifice like Christ did, first to give of their lives, to give up their glory, to give up their power, to give up their strength, to lift up those around them as Christ did. First through the gate of danger, first to forgive, first to die. That is how God teaches in Scripture, if we are following the example of Jesus Christ, that men are to go first. But entitlement flips that on its head. I am first to be served, first to be waited upon, first to be the one to tell everyone and control others. And so that is a sense of privilege. Then we have the second abusive relational element, and that is control, because the entitlement must have an avenue of action, and that is to control others. This security reinforces the abuser's privilege. So now they are secure in their privilege, which creates the victim, instead of the person with power, using their power to uplift and to protect, because all power that comes from God is used to protect others. That person, when they are abusive, is using their power to exploit and control, which gives fear and insecurity to the victim. When entitlement and control intersect, those two together, integrated, create coercion, forcefulness. And that is when the privilege of the abuser is secure, they can enact power over, forceful coercion. And the victim in this context experiences oppression. The fourth abusive relational element is compliance. And this is on the part of the victim. Now, in a domestic violence situation, we tell women that the single most dangerous time for them ever is when they decide to leave, and for the first year after the fact. Because at that point, they have removed compliance with the system. All four of these abusive relational elements have to be present for the system, the abusive system, to function smoothly. When you remove compliance, you no longer have a smoothly functioning abusive system. So, when compliance is present, the abuser's benefit is victory. They've won, because to an abusive mindset, to a power and control mindset, it is a zero-sum game. If I win, you must lose. If you have any win, I am a loser. There is no such thing as together we are a team that is more successful. It is only win-lose. So when compliance is present, which is, if you think back to the tools, that's where the intimidation is. The intimidation creates compliance on the part of the victim. When compliance is present, the abuser gains victory and the victim feels defeat. When the victim chooses to remove their compliance, and this is in no way victim shaming, I'm not saying that victims are responsible for the abuse they receive. I'm saying that when we end compliance with abuse, we face a new level of danger. And it is incredibly important for churches, for church leaders to recognize that when you are encouraging someone to take steps that will end their compliance, they need to have a professional safety plan. They need to be ready to go to a domestic violence shelter. They need to have professionals involved that are therapists, counselors, trauma-informed domestic violence professionals. Now, if you are looking at an abusive relational element or abusive relational system that is in your church structure, or that is in your workplace, or that has become a norm in your congregation, then just like a domestic violence victim, if you decide to stand up against the stream and you decide to remove your compliance, you are very likely going to experience the disruption of the smooth functioning of that abusive system. And it's going to be tough. And as women in ministry, often we experience that. We come up with other ideas. Sometimes the very presence of being a woman in ministry is disrupting the smoothly functioning abusive structure that has already been in place. So we can perhaps relate to this on many levels. But in order to get safe and to reverse that sense of defeat, compliance must be removed from the system. And it is very important to do it in a safe and protected and very wise, careful way. So those are the tools that I want to give you. My presentation is very practical and straightforward and filled with tools that you can walk away with. I am thrilled to take any questions, and I do have some, hold on, let me stop the screen share. And I do have some links I would love to drop in. Is there any questions at all that anyone has?
There are no questions that have come into the chat. I think we're all just processing all this information.
Not a whole lot. That's fine. Yes, thank you. I wanted it to be practical. I wanted it to be something that you can walk away with and say, these are rubrics that I can apply to my everyday interactions with people. So that was my goal, and I'm very glad for that. I do want to make you aware of resources. My organization is called Wild. Oh, are you raising your hand?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead and just Dana or Donna. Is it Stelian?
Yes, Dana. Dana is fine.
I can't hear you, but type in your question in the chat if you can.
You cannot hear me now, Dana?
Still can't hear you.
Oh.
Is there something wrong on my end? No. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have a good background in social work, and I'm a chaplain right now. And as far as I know, it's not recommended for people that are victims of abuse, marital abuse, to receive counseling together.
100% agree.
But many times the churches and the pastors are counseling people together. So how can we tell pastors that this is not such a good idea? And how can we, decide when it's the moment to split the people? I don't want to shame any, high-ranking institution right now, but this question comes from personal experience in my family, and it didn't end well. Let's put it this way.
I understand. So I see a direct message question. Oh, hold on, I will come to you. I strongly recommend any of the pastors who are listening, pastors, chaplains, and so on, if you find any hint of recognizing these tools of abuse, strongly recommend that they should each go to individual counseling. Okay, I remembered my third thing that I was going to say, and that is, there's two things. You guys remind me. One is about porn addiction, and the other is, if two people come to you, a very good way to go about it in the beginning is often to take them exactly at their word. So if a woman begins to disclose things are very difficult at home, and maybe she's very tentative, she may not come out and say, my husband has hit me, or I'm being verbally abused. She may not even know that it is abuse. She's just expressing that something is very difficult. Then suggesting that she get individual counseling and that it should be from a trauma-informed professional therapist, not just a pastor. No offense to our many capable pastors, but also that it would be great for her to take a break and visit somewhere else, go on a trip, have some time of separation to clear her head and to be able to think clearly about what is going on. So if she is saying, I'm going through this, you say, oh, if you're going through this, if this is what it is like, then you should take a break so that you can have a structured separation for the purpose of healing. Now, I'm not saying that we should recommend to people, oh, you should just get divorced. Don't get me wrong. That's not what I'm saying. If the husband comes to you and says, listen to how crazy my wife is, look at what I have to put up with, then take him at his word. You shouldn't have to put up with that. Why don't you let her go live somewhere else for a while? Why don't you move out for a while? The person who refuses to leave or refuses to allow the other person to leave is your controller. So if the husband at that point is like, hell no, excuse my French, there's no way I'm letting her leave my house. She doesn't get to leave me. She doesn't get to go visit her mom. She doesn't get to go stay with her sister. She's going to stay right here. Then you have an abusively controlling situation, and that is your big red flag. So that is one, just kind of a tip. Another thing is, if you have someone who discloses that they have discovered that their husband is addicted to porn or is watching pornography or is doing anything in the sex trade, visiting prostitutes, strip clubs, massage parlors, whatever the thing is that they have discovered, sexual addiction and infidelity is not a marriage problem. It is an addiction problem. We would not say that cocaine is a marriage problem and they need to go to counseling together to fix his cocaine addiction. Sexual addiction is a power and control addiction. It is not about sex and it is not about the marriage. So to tell someone to go to a pastor for marriage counseling to fix a porn addiction is going to be detrimental to all parties involved, because the person who has a sexual addiction needs aggressive, addiction-informed therapy for a very long period of time. And by that, I mean regularly, multiple times a week for 3 to 5 years in order to be able to know that the problem is being dealt with. This is not a lightweight thing, and it is far too common. And women suffer incredible shame along with this. And pastors very often make light of it, treat it as though it is not real adultery, not real abuse, and think that, just like someone said, a little prayer and Bible study is just gonna fix everything. We wouldn't tell someone who has a crack addiction or a narcotics addiction to just, pray a little bit and have some Bible study and you're just gonna kick that addiction. We would understand the need for intervention, rehab, therapy, skilled care providers, and pornography and sex addiction are the same. I have yet to find an abusive or domestic violence case where porn addiction and sex addiction was not a factor. I cannot say they are causal, but I can say they are highly correlated. And yes. Or does that help to answer your question?
Yes, it was more like I wanted to draw that information out of you, than to really ask a question. And
Okay.
my real question would be, but I if other people have more questions, I don't want to take all the time. My real question would be, if you recognize abuse, but the victim doesn't even know it, is there anything you can do other than provide support until they would realize it for themselves?
Yes and no. We must be very careful as those who are outside not to try to force a victim into a decision. When we take on the savior/rescue role, we end up becoming another abuser in their lives because we are taking away their voice and their autonomy. So when you recognize abuse in a situation, it is definitely important to give material, to give resources, and to be present. and to say, you know, hey, I'm worried about you. I am worried about your safety. I will be here with you. I will go with you to make a report. Now, if you, caveat, if there are minors involved, you always report. You always report. But if you're dealing with an adult, then unless there is a threat to a minor in the home or something like that, where you are obligated to be a mandatory reporter in your state and you need to know your state's laws, then giving them information and encouraging them to make the right decision without pressure is incredibly important. Otherwise, we step into the shoes of abuser because we take away their free will again. And that's not what any of us want when we're trying to get someone safe. They have to choose it for themselves or they will not stay out of the situation.
We take away their power in another way, but
yes,
still
with
take it
good
away.
intentions, but we still take it away, and that is never appropriate.
Thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? No? Okay. I just wanted to let you know on my website, which is wilderness2wild.com. I know the one with the giveaways has been posted a couple of times. I have a brand new full-length online course that is called Shiro, Your Wild Guide to Warrior After Abuse. It's under courses. We also have mini courses, which are post-trauma habit development for new habits, getting your wellness back. We have a workshop on unholy fruit, understanding when someone is not actually a believer by recognizing the fruits of the spirit or the unholy fruits of abuse. We have all of the free resources and tools and recommended reading lists and infographics. We have, for those who are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, I co-wrote a book for lay terms on the North American Division policy for sexual misconduct in the church. And it is a policy that is somewhat buried in the workers' manual, but the legal counsel for the Lake Union and I co-authored a layman's guide to the policy for sexual ethics and misconduct for the North American Division. It's a very handy resource if you want to start developing something for your church or your organization, regardless of your denomination. And we also do intensive trainings and crisis consults for those who are needed. So all of that is on the Wilderness to Wild website.